Starting us off at number 10 is the Madonna with Sint John. Dating back to the 15th century, this iconic painting is arguably one of the most debated depictions of alien life on Earth. Likely painted by Domenico Galileo, I mean there is debate there too, but that's another story. However, as you can see, it depicts the Madonna with baby Jesus and St. John. However, if you zoom into the top right corner, you'll notice something very strange. There is an unnamed man shielding his eyes from what looks like a bright light in the sky, and beside him is a dog staring up at the same shining object. The object appears to be strangely similar to most modern depictions of a UFO, painted as a dark oval with light rays shooting out from every angle, and has definitely been the subject of much debate among alien believers and non-believers for decades. Now, it wasn't unusual for the time to paint angels or other celestial beings brightly shining down on us from the sky, but as this specific painting appears to have no such addition to the light and is simply a strangely specific flying saucer, it has led many to believe that the painter was depicting a real-life alien sighting. And truth be told, it wasn't the first time such things showed up in artwork, and it is also not the last. Could it really be a UFO? I don't know, you tell me. Coming in at number 9, coins. During a house renovation in Egypt, a group of workers say that they found 2 coins that had very unusual portraits on them. The first they found resembles the head and shoulders of an alien, while the other looks more like it depicts an alien spaceship landing, and they immediately freaked out. Plus, one of them apparently had the words opportunus adest carved on the back, which is Latin for there is an opportunity, which definitely comes across a little spooky. I won't lie, there's a lot of debate around the validity of these coins. As many have pointed out, the coins could have easily been manipulated by believers, but it has been countered by the fact that either way, there's no actual concrete proof that they don't come from aliens. I mean, I have some questions. Would aliens even use currency like us, let alone physical currency? I honestly have no clue, but I mean, if I came across these coins, I too might be just as suspicious about their origin. Coming in at number 8, the Second Punic War sightings. During the Second Punic War, which occurred in ancient Rome between 218 and 201 BC, there were apparently many sightings of strange sky phenomenon that today believers claim were aliens coming down to Earth. These alleged sightings were found in the Annales Maximi, which is essentially a historical record kept by the chief high priest during the Roman Republic, and in it is the tale of a day in 218 BC where ships that apparently gleamed in the sky came out of clouds and stayed floating in the sky. And I mean, I don't blame anyone for jumping to an alien conclusion on that one. Then, 2 years later, in 216 BC, a similar sighting was documented where large gleaming round shields allegedly traveled through the air. Conspiracy theorists have clung on to these writings, pointing out how both descriptions can easily be imagined as the common UFO described in our modern era. Plus, this war was not the only one in history to claim such things happening in the sky. I mean, just like everything else on this list, will we ever know if the writings in the historical record really were an alien sighting? Probably not, unless we can figure out a time traveling situation, but it is a little suspicious, I would say. Coming in at number 7, Egyptian hieroglyphs. There's a lot of debate around alien involvement in ancient Egypt, and aside from the eternal debate of if aliens helped build the pyramids, hieroglyphs depict just about the most suspicious signs of extraterrestrial help. Now, I'll be the first to say that I don't think all hieroglyphs point towards ancient alien invasion, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a few that raise an eyebrow. One in particular is a hieroglyph appearing to show the Egyptians in possession of electricity, which, if that were true, feels like a surefire sign that they were not alone down here. The tableau depicts what appears to be people holding an electric lamp or maybe a light bulb, and believers have not wasted any time adding this to their Rolodex of reasons. And it's not just electricity that ancient Egyptians may have possessed, but other hieroglyphs seem to portray other forms of advanced technology that, in theory, they would have no way of knowing about. Hieroglyphs with a spooky resemblance to helicopters or planes have been found and gone viral, only adding to the mystery of how on earth this could have been something they would possibly know about. Could it be that aliens came down and gave them knowledge to advance their technology? Could the alleged airplane drawings be a UFO they saw in the sky? Conspiracy theorists say absolutely. Coming in at number 6, Dagu. Not every sign of alien life has to do with a UFO sightings, sometimes the signs are a bit more subtle. Dating back roughly to between the years of 14,000 and 400 BC, ancient Japan was known for crafting small human-like statues out of clay called dagu. These statues usually measure between 4 to 12 inches, and while the exact reason for their construction remains under speculation, there are two main theories. The first is that dagu were created as part of an ancient healing and fertility ritual, which could very well be true. However, the second one is a little more intriguing as it involves aliens. Now, if you take a look at these statues, they don't just look like a normal human statue. They have a strange, bulbous sort of look to them with large beanie baby eyes and kind of appear to be wearing what some have described as a stylized spacesuit. That, along with the helmeted head, has created a ton of speculation around if they were in fact modeled after aliens who visited ancient Japan and made contact with its inhabitants. I suppose we might never know for sure, but it's definitely an interesting theory. Coming in at number 5, Wandjina. For a long time, a lot of indigenous culture was passed down orally through stories. One of these such stories from Australian Aboriginal mythology talks about spirits named the Wandjina, and as they tell it, the Wandjina came down from the sky and created the earth as well as all of its inhabitants. Then, when the spirit found the place they would die, they painted their image on cave walls and entered a nearby watering hole. These paintings were then refreshed by indigenous people as a method of generating their life force. But what is intriguing about this tale in particular is that these spirits are depicted all over in the form of ancient rock paintings and appear to date back about 4,000 years. Plus, around the heads of the Wandjina are lines or blocks of color seemingly depicting lightning coming out of their helmets, which I mean is definitely a little suspicious. And many believers have been quick to point out the acute resemblance to the description of greys given by alleged alien abductees. If you don't know, greys are pretty much the classic depiction of an alien and are thought to be one of the extraterrestrial races, with UFOologists claiming they make up about 40% of reported abductions and sightings in the US. But could greys have come down, created life on Earth, and then disappeared into the night? I mean, maybe. Who knows? Coming in at number 4, a flaming shield. Similarly to the Roman historical report, other cultures too recorded significant happenings, and the Annales Lauricesnis Maiores, which recorded much of history between 680 AD and 829 AD in what is now modern-day Germany, is definitely filled with some mysterious and interesting stories. One tale in particular took place during the time where battalions of Saxon soldiers were attacking, and it details as the attack progressed, suddenly a bizarre object appeared in the skies overhead. The potential UFO was described as the likeness of two large flaming shields, reddish in color and appearing as though it was floating in the skies above them. Apparently the object was so frightening that the advancing Saxon army abandoned the fight and retreated back to safety, something that would have been incredibly unusual for them. Now, the only hole to poke in this is that the author is unknown, but it is widely accepted that writers of the time would record events as they happened, and that these stories would be compiled at a later date into the finished work. So just because we don't know who wrote it doesn't mean we don't know for sure it didn't happen. Coming in at number 3, lizard people. One of the wildest conspiracies out there is the belief that there is a race of half human, half lizard people that are taking over the world. Now, I will admit, this one is a little trickier for me to get behind for several reasons. However, after finding out about this piece of the puzzle, I am definitely a little curious. Although the conspiracy wasn't popularized until the 1990s, in the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologist Harry Reginald Hall made an unsettling discovery that definitely brought up a lot of questions. The archaeological site in question is referred to as Tal al-Ubaid and has served as a gold mine for ancient artifacts. However, by far, the strangest uncovered artifacts have to be the multiple series of lizard humanoid statues found by Harry in 1919. From what archaeologists can deduce, they don't appear to represent gods, as they aren't depicted in ceremonious poses, and so it has led many to believe they could be early depictions of the race of lizard people. I mean, I won't lie, these little statues are super creepy, and maybe one of the only times the lizard people theory has got me feeling a little suspicious. I don't know, do you think these figurines really could be proof of the evil lizard race invading the planet. Coming in at number 2, an alien mummy? Mummies are everywhere in Egypt, so while they are definitely interesting, they rarely cause any kind of huge excitement in the archaeological community, unless it's a particularly special one. Well, as I'm sure you've put together at this point, a few years ago, Dr. Victor Lubeck, who was a retired professor from the University of Pennsylvania, uncovered a strange mummy that made him question what he was seeing. Discovered in a small pyramid near Senusret II's pyramid was the mummy of a small, unidentified creature with seemingly no resemblance to that of a human body or known animal. To make things even more strange, buried along with the humanoid mummy were unusual objects Victor was unable to identify. What was clear was that whatever this was mummified with great respect and care, and an inscription was found on the tomb that roughly translates to star or sent from heaven. The running conspiracy theory is that it was an alien who was involved in some way with advising the pharaoh Senusret II, which would explain his royal treatment and careful mummification. I mean, it's definitely unsettling and absolutely an unusual find, but is it an alien? I mean, I guess it could be. And last up today on our number 1 spot, the Sumerian civilization. The ancient Sumerians were a group of people that suddenly became established in Mesopotamia circa 2900 BCE. No one is quite sure where they came from originally, but there is a general conspiracy that is well documented that their origins were not from planet Earth. According to a series of ancient texts, the Sumerians were created by an alien race called the Anunnaki, who came to Earth after their planet Nibiru collided with another planet in the solar system. The aliens found themselves in a short supply of gold and saw that Earth was in high supply, so they landed here and supposedly created a new species that was half alien, half human to mine the gold for them. Now, it does sound a little crazy, but the Sumerians did have advanced scientific, agricultural, and technological knowledge, as well as an acute understanding of the solar system, which was highly advanced at their time. Researchers have recorded clay pot batteries that still contained electrodes, a flyable model airplane, as well as an unexplainable capability to cut large stones with exact precision. Not to mention, similarly to the Egyptians, Sumerians seemed familiar and depicted drawings of rockets, airplanes, and helicopters on certain artifacts from their time too. And if that didn't make you even just a bit curious, they have also discovered mitochondrial DNA evidence linked to a woman in Africa dating more than 100,000 years ago near a gold mine. While of course we might never know for sure, the legend of the Anunnaki has made even some of the biggest skeptics question the reality of aliens.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Lake Yukon UFO. Just this past weekend, on Sunday, February 12th, US officials were able to confirm that the Air Force and the National Guard had downed a UFO that was seen over Lake Huron, which has a shoreline that is shared by the US state Michigan as well as the Canadian province of Ontario, where I am right now. Representative Alyssa Slotkin, a Michigan Democrat, not only confirmed the downing, but also took to Twitter to write, quote, "Great work by all who carried out this mission both in the air and back at headquarters. We're all interested in exactly what this object was and its purpose." Of course, this only worked to fuel rumors over what exactly this UFO could actually be or where it came from. The Department of Defense is said to have been tracking the flying object for some time before it decided that action needed to be taken in order to get the object out of airspace. So far, while there still hasn't been any confirmations of what exactly this object was, it has been described as a, quote, octagonal structure. Right now, recovery efforts of the debris is underway, but as of filming this, there have been no official reports of what exactly this UFO might have been or where it came from. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Yukon UFO. On Saturday, February 11th, just a day before the Lake Huron UFO, a US fighter jet shot down this unidentified flying object that was in the skies above Yukon, a Canadian territory. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took to Twitter to let Canadians know that he had ordered the, quote, takedown of an unidentified object that violated Canadian airspace. In an effort to take down the UFO, both Canadian and US aircrafts were scrambled, and Air Force members took to the skies try to execute the successful downing of the object. Canadian forces are now working to recover and analyze the wreckage of this UFO to hopefully identify its origin. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, also known as NORAD, had initially detected the object flying at a high altitude over Alaska on Friday evening, and on Saturday is when it crossed into Canadian airspace. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder explained that, quote, a US F-22 shot down the object in Canadian territory using an AIM-9X missile following close coordination between US and Canadian authorities. Both Canadians and Americans are on high alert with this UFO, considering it is just one of the many that have been taken out of airspace in the last couple weeks alone. Like I mentioned before, right now the Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are working on recovering the wreckage, but the FBI will also be working closely with the RCMP during the investigation. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Alaska UFO. Okay, we're doing like a reverse timeline for these few points because now we are talking about the Alaska UFO that was shot down one day before the Yukon UFO. It was like Alaska, Yukon, Lake Huron. On February 10th, an F-22 US fighter jet shot down an unidentified object over the waters near Alaska. The object was said to have been caught flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and was deemed a, quote, reasonable threat to aviation, which is why the orders were given to take it down. The object was first detected the day before, and a flyby happened on the Thursday it was seen, before the second flyby and takedown which took place on the Friday. Here's where things get really suspicious though. The pilots who were sent up to investigate and take down the UFO all gave differing reports of what it was that they saw. Some of the pilots even say that the UFO interfered with their sensors, and others claimed that they couldn't see any kind of propulsion system on the object, which poses the question, how could it have possibly been just casually cruising 40,000 feet in the air? In a statement over the weekend, the US Northern Command said that they have no new information about the object's, quote, capabilities, purpose, or origin, and they also explained that the recovery efforts are being slowed down by the icy conditions in the region. The National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, said of the object, quote, we're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now. He continued to say, quote, we don't know who owns it, whether it's state-owned or corporate-owned or privately owned, we just don't know. People are especially concerned about this UFO in particular because of the important military sites in Alaska, as well as its very close proximity to its neighboring countries. In our number 7 spot today, we have the balloon. On February 4th, it became public knowledge that officials were monitoring a strange object in the sky that they claimed had entered airspace above Alaska on January 28. They monitored the object as it later drifted from Idaho southeast to the Carolinas before the decision was made to take it down. This operation was carried out and the object was shot down. As it turns out, this object was realized to be some kind of a balloon. The balloon is said to have been about the size of 3 buses, and it was flying at an altitude of around 60,000 to 65,000 feet. Authorities were able to discover that the origin of this object was from China, but there are conflicting accounts of what its purpose might have been. China has maintained that the device was a civilian aircraft that strayed into American airspace, but senior American officials are seemingly believing that the balloon was originally supposed to conduct surveillance. Many believe that the spying was to be done over US military bases in Guam and Hawaii, but winds carried it off course to Alaska, Canada, and finally the United States mainland, where it was then shot down. Whatever this balloon was for, I'm just glad that we know what this one was and where it had come from, because some of these other recent UFOs are just too mysterious. In our number 6 spot today, we have the classified report. We are just scratching the surface of our time in 2023, but already there are some crazy announcements, including one regarding a report that was delivered to Congress from the Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there has been a total of 510, quote, unidentified aerial phenomena observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of these were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which, quote, appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing, what we as the public know is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual real secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise, one day we'll find out. In our number 5 spot today, we have the 2021 UFO. On February 21st of 2021, a blogger was using a radio scanner to try and pick up from an aircraft when he received much more than he ever expected. He intercepted the transmission of the wrong aircraft, but at the right time. As an American Airlines flight was headed from Cincinnati to Phoenix around 1:19 p.m., the pilot came on the radio to ask the question, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over top of us." After this, he followed up with, "I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast right over the top of us." Not only were FAA air traffic controllers not able to see any object in the area on their radar scope, but they still have been unable to identify exactly what it could have been. This does happen more often than any of us really know, and it is possible that the object could have been a part of some covert military or Navy operation, but it certainly raises some alarm bells that it was unable to be tracked in any sort of capacity. I wonder if this is one of those stories that will remain a mystery, or if one day we'll get some sort of answers as to what exactly happened here. In our number 4 spot today, we have the 2023 sighting. This UFO video was taken recently on January 22nd, and the video was posted to Reddit by a user called MaxKeller96, and with the video, they gave some context. Quote, "My sister, dad, and I were out hiking near Picket Post when one of us noticed something glimmering near the mountain, so we stopped to look at it. All I could really make out is that it was a small bright dot in the sky. After a good 15 seconds of staring at it, just silently hanging in the air, trying to figure out what the was, I started recording. Sorry it's shaky, I could barely see my phone screen and was trying to get a good look at it with my own eyes. It then dropped 2 flare-looking things, though my sister swears she counted at least 3, and then it instantly sped off, heading south-ish. Up until that point, I thought it might have been a helicopter or a drone, as there's a lot of military/Air Force-based stuff out here, but there's no way anything can accelerate that fast. We all lost sight of it nearly instantly after the video cuts, and we were all properly freaked out about it. I've replayed the video probably 100 times and tried showing it to everyone I know, and no one had any idea what it could be other than a super high-end drone. If you think you know, please let me know. After watching the video also probably 100 times, I can definitely say that I have no idea what they all saw that day, because I also really don't think it was a drone. I also have to say that this video even gathered people together on Reddit, and that is no easy feat. Redditors are ruthless, and often very skeptical, and still people are pretty on board and confused over what this could have been. In our number 3 spot today, we have the USS Princeton UFO. This UFO sighting comes from 2004, but footage of it was released in 2017. On November 14th of 2004, the USS Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out around 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Black Aces Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate of Strike Fighter Squadron 41 went over in 2 fighter jets in order to kind of scope out the situation, and when they arrived, they saw what at first appeared to be churning water while there was an oval shape just below the surface. After this, a white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it, like no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jets didn't pick up any sort of exhaust, which is especially peculiar when we think of what the pilots who just shot down the Alaska UFO said. No propulsion, right? Gives me chills just thinking about it, because how could that be possible? The commander and lieutenant commander tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. Like, when I say quickly, I mean it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of the fighter jets. Faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know exactly what this was, because it definitely seems like we don't have the technology to make this sort of thing possible. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Chicago UFO. This UFO sighting comes from November 7th, 2006, and it was at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Flight 446 was getting ready to head to North Carolina when an employee from United Airlines that was on the tarmac noticed a dark gray metallic aircraft hovering over one of the gates. After this, 11 other employees and even a few people who didn't work there saw this gray saucer floating at around 4:15 p.m. The people who saw it explained that it hovered above the gate for about 5 minutes before it just shot itself upwards and broke through the clouds, leaving a hole in the clouds where you could see the blue sky through. The strangest thing, however, is that this flying flying saucer did not show up on the radar, so the Federal Aviation Administration just called it a weather phenomena and would not investigate it, despite there being around 15 witnesses who all saw exactly the same thing. This story did, however, become one of the most read stories on the Chicago Tribune's website and even went international because it certainly is very interesting. And finally, in our number 1 spot, we have the Stephenville UFO. In January of 2008, in the small town of Stephenville, Texas, a bunch of residents all saw something in the sky that they couldn't believe. In the beginning, it appeared to be white lights in the sky that were first in a single arc, but then they quickly moved to form 2 parallel lines. It was estimated that the lights were spanning about a mile long and half a mile wide. The craziest part is that it was flying at 3,000 miles per hour, which is similar to the speed of a fighter jet, but there was no sound reported at all. The government chalked this sighting up to the US Air Force flight operation, but many of the residents who saw this event on that day were absolutely not convinced and truly felt like they were lied to. Some even explained that what they saw was too technologically advanced for the human civilization. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Russian UFO. Just yesterday, Russia saw some kind of unidentified flying object overhead, and it caused them to need to shut down their airspace over one of their biggest cities. Passenger planes from Pulkovo Airport in St. Petersburg were grounded after the reports of a mysterious object started coming out. The military ordered the closure in order to not only investigate, but also to try and keep everybody safe. Right now, the best guess as to what this UFO could have been is likely a drone, with officials saying the object was heading towards the Gulf of Finland, but even if it was just a drone, they have yet to decipher where it came from or what its purpose was. Apparently, Russian officials haven't yet confirmed that there really was a UFO, but they did confirm the closure of the airport. Russian citizens also got quite a fright when they received alerts claiming an air raid was taking place and they were told to seek shelter immediately, but officials later claimed that the alert was quote fake and it is suspected to have been a hacking attack. In our number 9 spot today, we have the UFO convoy. This sighting comes from someone on Reddit who swears that they passed a UFO in transport, and they even have the videos to prove it. Their post reads, quote, "Backstory, I was coming from LA and after passing Bakersfield, the freeway started to slow down and traffic started to pile up. Once I got close to the source of the traffic, I decided to record what was going on. I was able to record what looked like a UFO saucer-shaped object. However, I did pass by it fairly quickly. Once I passed it, I kept questioning myself, what did I just see? But I decided to brush it off thinking it might be replica for some UFO carnival or alien event. After passing the UFO about 5 miles out, I decided to take an exit and use the bathroom. After the restroom break, I got back onto the freeway the exact same time as the convoy with the UFO was passing me while I was entering the freeway. I was not able to make a video of that specific moment. Once I was on the freeway, I saw 2 vehicles blocking each lane going CA5 north. Both cars seemed to have federal license plates. As well, ahead of them was a convoy of 2 CHP trucks with their lights on blocking both lanes. Ahead of the 2 CHP trucks was the big rig hauling the alleged UFO, and in front of it were 2 more CHP officers. Though I was able to make a video of the convoy as it was exiting the freeway, and when I looked at it under more light, I was amazed to see something so similar to a UFO. Again, I'm not clearly sure what I saw, but with all the circumstances and what was occurring in that moment, it seemed to be a UFO. Also, when shooting the last part of the video, the federal agent in the white pickup truck seemed to speed up and block my view of recording. At first I thought, why would they not cover it up if it was a real UFO of types? But then I thought, maybe that's the whole plan. Hide it in plain sight. It's very sneaky, alright? In our number 8 spot today, we have the advanced technology. So this UFO sighting comes from a while ago, but it just recently became relevant, and that is because some former US Air Force personnel have begun explaining to the Pentagon that they believe back in the 60s, there were UFOs that supposedly had the ability to turn off their nuclear warheads. Apparently, these officers recently told this to the government's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who had contacted former Air Force ICBM launch officer Robert Salas to get information about the encounter with an orange flying disc that switched off 10 warheads at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967. There was another former officer, Dr. Robert Jacobs, who also apparently told the AARO that he had gone as far as to make a film of the UFO for the Air Force in 1964, and that this film captured images of a UFO shooting a test missile out of the sky. With the peaking peaking interest in UFOs and the potential for an advanced civilization apart from our own, it appears as though the government is spending more time now researching and looking into these claims because, well, why would they make them up and continue on with the same story some 50 years later? In our number 7 spot today, we have the Texas 2022 UFO. This UFO video came from Reddit and was posted by the user SolarBoy1. With the video, they posted the statement that came from the girl who had sent them the video. The statement reads, quote, "This happened at 5:09 a.m. I was not about to go out there when I wasn't even dressed and I was scared. People always think they would have done things differently if it was them, but you never know what you'll do when you are actually having that experience. I always thought I would be doing the most to get a better view and record, but my anxiety was triggered and I could not go back to sleep after that. I was only recording to show my boyfriend, who was awake at the time since he works night shift. Pretty much disappeared after I don't know where it went. I honestly felt in that moment that they knew I was watching them when the light shined towards me. It was so bright. That's when I got really scared. I have a Tia that's kinda psychic, like she just always knows things and sees stuff, and she called me right after it happened because I sent the video in our family group chat. She said, we are going to start seeing UFOs more often in this new year and that they are going to reveal themselves more. I know I don't know her, but I fully trust this lady's aunt. I feel like she knows something, and considering this was before all of the UFO panic in the last few weeks, it seems like she really was onto something. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Las Vegas UFO. Back in December of 2022, just a couple days before Christmas, residents and visitors in Las Vegas were stunned as they looked up to the sky and saw something none of them had ever seen before. It appears as though an object with big glowing lights on it was hovering in place just above the clouds. Not only this, but the moving lights from the Las Vegas Strip, every time they ran past this object, rather than illuminating it, it seemed as though the object just reflected the light in a very odd way you wouldn't necessarily expect. Of course, Reddit blew up with videos and photos and questions and theories, and there is a leading theory, but I personally am not totally convinced. Basically, they say that this was all due to a really rare phenomena that is almost never seen in Las Vegas except for somehow that night. Basically, they say that the weird lights and reflection and everything is just a result of ice crystals hanging in the air. Of course, I'm sure there's a more sciencey explanation, but to me, this all just seems a little too convenient. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This incident is often referred to as Britain's Roswell incident, and it took place in December of 1980. The incident took place in the Rendlesham Forest, which is a pine forest in England that, at the time, sat in between two United States Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. Over several nights around this time of year, a number of credible military personnel reported strange and colorful lights both above as well as in the forest. Some of those who were sent to investigate the strange lights reported seeing a triangular craft at close range, and there was even a famous audio tape made of the encounter. After these happenings, the UK Ministry of Defence claimed that the incident posed no threat to national security, and because of that, it was never investigated further. What really happened in the forest all of those years ago remains a total mystery, but those who actually witnessed the lights in the aircraft are said to have remained totally baffled. In our number 4 spot today, we have the New Jersey UFO. This UFO sighting took place in 2001, just above the New Jersey Turnpike. On July 14th, 2001, just after midnight, for around 15 minutes, motorists driving down this highway stopped to stare at the sky to witness what no one could believe. There were strange orange and yellow lights in a V formation just above the Arthur Kill waterway. There were a ton of witnesses who were all extremely confused and shocked as to what they were seeing. Air traffic controllers initially denied that there were any flying objects that could have caused the mysterious lights, but a group that is called the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators claimed that they received radar data that night that would corroborate the story that the witnesses were telling. It may not have been aliens, but it certainly was some sort of unidentified flying object that no one had ever seen before, and there were people from all walks of life witnessing it together. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Belgium wave. Nearing the end of November of 1989, citizens of Belgium were shocked to report seeing a big triangular UFO hovering in the sky. Aside from these reports from the visual witnesses, however, there wasn't any physical evidence supporting the existence of the UFO. Flash forward to a few months later in March of 1990, and new sightings began to pop up, but this time their presence was being confirmed, this time by 2 military ground radar stations. Here's where things get really strange though. 2 F-16 fighter jets were sent out to investigate what was going on, and this is when the pilots found that they couldn't see anything visually, but their radars were able to spot the target. While trying to keep track of these objects, the UFOs were just moving way too fast, and the pilots ended up losing track of them. In the end, there were about 13,500 people who witnessed this UFO incident, which has made it one of the most widely experienced UFO sightings of the modern era. The Belgian Air Force had no idea what it was that was witnessed, but they thankfully did acknowledge that some sort of unknown activity had taken place, instead of just trying to sweep it under the rug and pretend like nothing happened. In our number 2 spot today, we have the cylinder UFO. This UFO sighting doesn't really come with a crazy story or anything, but the video truly does speak for itself. It's weird, and if I saw this on an afternoon with a perfectly clear sky, I would probably take my phone out and start recording as well. The video was taken in the summer of 2021 around noon one day by Reddit user I Broke the Box. The video shows them zooming in and out on some kind of object that is flying through the sky, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. I don't know if you've ever had like a floater in your eye before, but at first it kinda looks like that, like some weird cylinder just floating around. But the appearance changes slightly when it seems like maybe the sun is reflecting off of it. People in the replies have tried to speculate over what it could be that is in this video, but no one is entirely sure, so I have to ask, what do you think it is? In our number 1 spot today, we have Flight 1628. Back on November 17th, 1986, Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628 was flying from Paris to an airport near Tokyo when they had a very strange UFO encounter. On the part of the flight where they were over Alaska around 1711, the crew witnessed 2 unidentified objects to the left of their craft. The 2 objects rose up quite quickly to meet the craft and continued to fly alongside it. Each object had 2 rectangular things that are said to have appeared to be some sort of glowing nozzles or thrusters, but the crew on the plane couldn't see much else. They weren't able to see if there was anyone or anything inside. The closer these objects came to the plane, the more light was let inside, so much so that at the closest points the plane's cabin was totally lit up, and the captain even said he could feel the heat from the lights on his face. After this, the 2 objects left, but this was not the end, because a third, much larger disc-shaped object showed up and started following the plane. In the end, the plane needed to make an emergency landing in Anchorage, Alaska, because this third craft was seriously large and incredibly frightening, and they just needed to figure out what was going on. The plane landed successfully and investigations were conducted, but to this day, no one is exactly sure what the men on board saw, but the entire crew witnessed the exact same thing. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Valençol incident. Everywhere's gotta have their Roswell incident, and this one is said to be France's. This sighting was made by a man named Maurice Masse, who is a French farmer, and it took place in July of 1965. One day, before starting work while outside smoking, Maurice witnessed an object coming out of the sky and landing in his lavender field about 200 feet away from where he was. He was, of course, frustrated at someone landing in his field, and figured that it was likely a helicopter that made some sort of unauthorized landing, but as he got closer, things took quite the turn. He realized this was no helicopter and instead was some sort of oval-shaped structure that was standing on 4 legs. In front of the strange craft were 2 figures, just under 4 feet tall. He explained that they were making a sort of grumbling sound and included a brief description of these creatures before explaining that one of them took out a pencil-like device and pointed it at him, which left him completely stuck in his tracks, just frozen in time. As he was stuck there, the creatures got back on their craft and took off, and after about 20 minutes, he finally regained his ability to move. Here's the thing, to me this just sounds like a fantastical story, but there was some kind of physical evidence left behind that I, and many others, can't quite figure out an explanation to. Basically, the craft did end up leaving a mark. There was a hole and a lot of moisture left over from where the craft was. Like I mentioned, this was in the middle of a lavender field. Soon after this area became really hard, almost like concrete, and definitely not like the soil everywhere else in the field, and all of the plants around this area started to die. Analysis of the soil revealed that there was a higher amount of calcium in the soil at the landing site than there was anywhere else. This definitely shows that there was some kind of unusual event, but could Maurice be telling the truth? In our number 9 spot today, we have the Broadhaven UFO sightings. This UFO sighting took place all the way back in 1977, and it started when an entire class of children all claimed to see some sort of object flying through the sky. The children rightfully were confused and excited over what they had seen, but of course the teachers and adults around them believed it was just their wild imaginations making it up. This is when they decided to split all of the children up and have them draw what it is that they saw. While there of course were variations in all of the children's drawings, they all were basically the same thing, which begs the question, did they all really see this thing then? The children weren't the only ones who saw it either. Shortly after their sighting, other local residents began to explain that they had seen something strange flying through the air, including one hotel owner. One of the things things that really gets people about this case and these sightings in particular is that all these different people claimed to have seen something at that time, and even though it's been almost half a century, not a single one of them has ever said that it was a hoax or that they were lying about what they saw. They all have the same story they did the day that it happened. In our number 8 spot today, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, so I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying that I have ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner when he allegedly saw something he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering silver disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett only 10 miles from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13, but the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified, along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of the horrible incident. In our number 7 spot today, we have Levelland. This incident took place in 1957 in Levelland, Texas, and actually was the inspiration for a scene in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In the real-life incident, dozens of citizens from across the city began individually reporting seeing a rocket or a strange set of lights or some sort of unidentified object, but that wasn't it. Whatever these citizens were seeing was also reportedly interfering with their vehicles as well. Engines were just suddenly dying out and lights were cutting off. If this happened to just one or two, this could have been some kind of strange coincidence, but it was way too many instances. Something else definitely had to have been at play. The authorities at first thought that the reports were a hoax until they too saw the strange lights as they began to investigate. This is where Project Blue Book came in to investigate, and they came up with quite the conclusion. They claimed that what had happened here was simply just a case of an electrical storm and ball lightning that caused the lights and the mechanical malfunctions. That's super reasonable, but the catch with this explanation is that there were no reported thunderstorms in the area that night at all. I'm just saying, something here clearly isn't adding up quite right. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Air Force disappearance. On the night of November 23rd, 1953, near the Canadian-US border, the United States Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar where there shouldn't have been one. This was showing that there was some sort of unidentified object that was in restricted airspace over Lake Superior. In response to this, an F-89C Scorpion jet was sent to investigate with 2 crew members. First Lieutenant Felix Moncla was piloting the craft, while Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson was observing the radar. Once in the air, the pair had trouble tracking the object, which kept changing its course, which then led to ground control helping to direct them. The jet pursued the unknown object for 30 minutes as it closed in on it at 500 miles per hour. After a while, the 2 blips on the radar, one being the unknown object and the other being the investigating jet, converged into one point, and then suddenly the radar return from the F-89 simply just disappeared from ground control's radar scope. Shortly after this, the radar blip that was from the unidentified object also veered off and then vanished. The men who were sent to investigate in the jet never returned from the mission, and there was never any wreckage found signifying an accident despite extensive searches. The men and the jet just disappeared completely. It is said that the explanations for the disappearance that have been released throughout the years have changed and flip-flopped in what they say happened, so at this point no one has any idea what truly happened here. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Roswell incident. This whole rigmarole started in 1947 when some sort of a crash took place near a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Shortly after this, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying that they had recovered a flying disc from the ranch, but the Army quickly retracted the statement and said that it wasn't that, but instead was a conventional weather balloon. This was a little sketchy, but most people just let it slide until the 1970s. What happened in the 70s is that a retired lieutenant colonel began to speak out. In an interview with a UFO researcher, he said that the weather balloon story was a cover-up and that alien remains were actually recovered from the crash site. There were both first and second-hand witnesses who claimed that not only were there at least one, but possibly more alien spacecrafts that had crashed at the scene, but also that extraterrestrial remains were also recovered by the military, who then began to engage in a cover-up. In 1994, the story changed from a weather balloon to nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, and it was stated that the stories of the alien bodies were probably just test dummies that had been dropped from high altitudes. I'm not gonna lie, this whole thing sounds a little sketchy. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't say for certain what happened, but someone is definitely lying about it. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Foo Fighters. On a late November evening in 1944, nearing the end of the Second World War, Lieutenant Fred Ringwald was riding as observer in a night fighter that was being piloted by Lieutenant Ed Schluter with Lieutenant Donald J. Myers on radar. The men were in the Rhine Valley, which sits north of Strasbourg on the French and German border, when Lieutenant Ringwald saw something. He said, quote, "I wonder what those lights are over there in the hill." When the rest turned to look, they saw 8 to 10 fiery orange glowing lights. They checked with the ground radar, but nothing was registering. The men thought that there was a chance that these lights could be some kind of air weapon, so they turned themselves to be ready to fight, only to have the lights suddenly vanish. The 3 men who experienced the strange lights at first didn't tell anyone about what they saw because they feared being ostracized by those around them. This all changed, however, when stories of similar sightings began to spread through their unit. As it would turn out, many other pilots and flight crews experienced these same orange glowing lights, and one pilot even experienced a strange cigar-shaped flying object in this scenario. In this instance, the UFO was described as, quote, "a wingless cigar-shaped object glowing red just a few yards off the plane's wingtip." Lieutenant Krasny, justifiably spooked, instructed the pilot to attempt evasive maneuvers, but the glowing object stayed right next to the jet for several minutes before it, quote, "flew off and disappeared." Throughout the years, the explanations for what these people saw have ranged from things like combat fatigue to the works of Nazi astrophysicists, so at this point, what exactly happened here remains quite a mystery. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange out the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing it. Shortly after they noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and this is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet offshore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP, but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in the investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it was also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were totally accounted for. So what could these witnesses have all seen? Since they never officially identified what it was, in the official Government of Canada documents it is listed as a UFO. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Betty and Barney Hill case. The Betty and Barney Hill case is definitely one of the most famous UFO abduction stories ever told, and it absolutely has some pretty compelling components. Basically, the story goes that the 2 were driving on a road in New Hampshire one night on the way home from a trip the pair had taken. Before they got into the car on their way home, they were in a diner and figured that if they really pushed through, they could beat the wind and rains from an approaching hurricane. It was 10 p.m. when they left the diner, and they figured by around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. latest, they'd arrive home. As they drove, out of nowhere, a bright light started to follow them. Suddenly, they arrive home and it's somehow daylight, and their clothes are dirty and ripped, and their watches had stopped working. This is all jarring enough, but neither Betty nor Barney could figure out what happened. They were both missing time. Later, during a session with a psychiatrist, they were able to recall being touched by aliens during their abduction. Project Blue Book would come to investigate their claims, and while people remain skeptical, no one has ever been able to debunk their story. This officially went on to become the first ever widely publicized abduction story, and to this day, people still debate what really happened to the hills. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that, at the time, was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. Well, there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been. One witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he had ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object, it would slowly accelerate and rapidly accelerate and then move away from them and stop. Then they would take off after it again and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it, and when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them about it. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely a strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the 1976 Tehran incident. The 1976 Tehran UFO incident is a notable case in UFOlogy that took place on September 19, 1976. The incident involved a luminous object that was observed hovering over the city by 2 F-4 Phantom II jet interceptors of the Iranian Air Force. The object was detected on radar and appeared to be capable of jamming the communication systems of the jets. The pilots reported that they saw a brightly lit diamond-shaped object that emitted a green light, and they attempted to engage it with missiles. However, the object evaded their attempts and quickly disappeared. At a pilots conference in 2007, one of the pilots in this incident, Parvez Jafari, said he attempted to fire at the UFO, but something strange was preventing him from doing so. He said, quote, my weapons jammed and my radio communications garbled. The incident was investigated by the Iranian government and the US Defense Intelligence Agency, and it has been the subject of much speculation and debate among UFO enthusiasts. Some argue that the incident was evidence of extraterrestrial activity, while others suggest it may have been a secret military experiment or some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. Despite the official investigation, the incident remains unresolved and its true nature remains a mystery. In our number 9 spot today, we have the McMinnville UFO photographs. The McMinnville UFO photographs are a series of 2 photographs taken by Paul and Evelyn Trent on May 11, 1950 in McMinnville, Oregon. The photos depict a metallic disc-shaped object in the sky with trees and buildings visible in the foreground. The Trents claimed that they saw the object hovering in the sky and were able to capture it on camera. The photographs quickly gained widespread attention and were widely circulated in newspapers and magazines, and they were also examined by several experts, including the US Air Force, which conducted an investigation known as Project Blue Book. Famous project here on Most Amazing Top 10. The Trents maintained that the photographs were genuine and that they had not tampered with them in any way. However, some skeptics have suggested that that the photographs may have been hoaxed or that the objects in the photographs were just a common object. Despite the controversy surrounding the photographs, however, they remain one of the most famous and well-known UFO sightings in history. The photographs have been the subject of numerous articles, books, and documentaries, and have inspired countless discussions and debates about the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. In our number 8 spot today, we have the USS Nimitz Tic Tac UFO incident. This UFO sighting comes from 2004. On November 14th of that year, the USS Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this, the crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out at about 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate went over in 2 fighter jets, and when they arrived, they saw what at first appeared to be churning water while there was an oval shape just below the surface. After this, the white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it. Like no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jets didn't pick up any sort of exhaust. The commander and lieutenant commander tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. And when I say quickly, I mean it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of the fighter jets. So, faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know exactly what it was, but it certainly was beyond our current capabilities. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Aguadilla Airport incident. The Aguadilla Airport UFO incident occurred on April 25th, 2013, when a strange object was spotted hovering above the Rafael Hernandez Airport in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. The object was initially detected by radar and later confirmed by security cameras as a glowing, unidentified object that appeared to be traveling at a low altitude. The object was described as being around 4 to 5 feet in length, and it moved very quickly and very erratically. It was also observed to emit a bright white light and appeared to be changing shape. The incident attracted widespread attention and was investigated by several government agencies, including the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Homeland Security. The object was ultimately classified as an unidentified flying object, or UFO, and no explanation was given for its presence in the area. It is even said that a US Customs and Border Protection aircraft actually captured infrared video of the incident that was given to the Scientific Coalition for UFOlogy by a whistleblower. This video is said to show the UFO traveling at super low altitudes, sometimes lower than the treetops, but at speeds close to 100 miles per hour. The Aguadilla Airport UFO incident is considered one of the most significant UFO sightings in recent history due to the high level of documentation and the involvement of government agencies. It continues to be a topic of discussion and speculation among UFO enthusiasts and researchers, and has contributed to ongoing efforts to uncover the truth about the nature and origin of UFO sightings around the world. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Project Blue Book sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was once tasked with being an investigator for Project Blue Book, which was the name used to describe a study of UFOs conducted by the United States Air Force from March 1952 to December 17, 1969, when the project was terminated. Okay, we talk about Project Blue Book a lot. You gotta know what it is. While his job was meant to be to investigate and essentially debunk UFO sightings, later in life he took to Congress to stand up and explain his own UFO encounter that he was never able to explain away. The moment that truly stuck with him all of these years took place back in 1952 when he was sent off to Newfoundland after there were reports of a UFO that had crashed off of the coast of St. John's. As he arrived to the scene, there were at least 100 people who all stood and stared into the water, and as he was able to follow their gaze and see what they were all looking at, he couldn't quite believe his eyes. He recalled the water being quite clear, and under it you could see 2 circular crafts, each one approximately 18 feet in diameter. He said that they were both floating just below the surface of the water, no more than 20 feet from the shore, and not only this, but he could also see 2 beings with the crafts. He said, quote, "The first thing I saw was the UFOs, and it was apparent to me that they were doing something to the craft, and I couldn't really tell what because they were on the bottom side of it and not visible to me except when they would occasionally get over over to the side where I could see them. He claims he watched on as the beings worked on the craft until one of them raised out of the water and disappeared, but not before accelerating to speeds in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 miles per hour. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Coyne-Mansfield helicopter incident. The Coyne-Mansfield helicopter UFO incident occurred on October 18, 1973, when 4 members of the Ohio Army National Guard were flying in a helicopter over Mansfield, Ohio. Suddenly, they encountered a large metallic disc-shaped object that was hovering in the sky. The object began to move towards the helicopter, causing the crew to take evasive maneuvers. Despite their efforts, the object continued to follow them, eventually passing overhead and disappearing into the distance. The crew reported the incident to their superiors, and an investigation was launched by the military and the Federal Aviation Administration. The incident received significant media attention, and it remains one of the most compelling UFO sightings on record. What makes this incident particularly intriguing is the credibility of the witnesses. The crew were all experienced pilots with military training, and their account of the incident was corroborated by radar data and other witnesses on the ground. Despite extensive investigations, no satisfactory explanation has ever been offered for what they saw that day. In our number 4 spot today, we have Apollo 11. So we can sit here on Earth all day and talk about the potential for alien life and UFOs, but who would know more than the people who have actually been to space, which are of course astronauts. Definitely on the list of coolest and scariest jobs in the world, there haven't been a ton of people who have had the unbelievable privilege of experiencing space firsthand, but there are even less of them who have claimed to see something that seems completely unexplainable. People who have claimed these sorts of things include Edgar Mitchell, Catherine Coleman, and Dr. Brian O'Leary. The very interesting part about many of these claims is that they also include some sort of government cover-up as well with their claims. There was also Buzz Aldrin, who spoke about his Apollo 11 experience, and he detailed the crew seeing something flying alongside them, and at first they believed it was the final stage of a detached rocket, but then Mission Control confirmed that it was actually 6,000 miles away from them, leaving them with no answers on what the flying object could be. I can't imagine going to space at all, let alone encountering a UFO flying right beside you. Also, I can't believe that I hadn't heard of that story before, because to me, that sounds like full-blown alien contact. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Go Faster video. In 2017, after the existence of the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program became more well known, a video was released of an encounter between an FA-18 Super Hornet and some sort of unidentified flying object. This video was the third in a series of 3 videos, and there weren't a ton of details released about exactly what happened during this encounter. Using the Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, they were able to capture an extremely fast-moving white oval that was around 45 feet long. The oval had no wings and didn't appear to have any kind of exhaust either. They were tracking the UFO at an altitude of 25,000 feet just above the Atlantic Ocean, and then they were shocked as the craft rotated on its axis and flew away. There was no explanation released with the footage because it truly is unbelievable and currently unexplainable. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Delphos Ring incident. The Delphos Ring UFO incident occurred on November 2nd, 1971 in Delphos, Kansas, when a family witnessed a strange object hovering over their farm. The UFO emitted a bright light that illuminated the surrounding area and left a glowing ring in the ground after it disappeared. The family reported the incident to the local sheriff, who took a sample of the ring for analysis. Investigations were conducted by several experts, including the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, who collected soil samples and found that the ring was caused by the removal of topsoil, which had been exposed to a high amount of heat. Additionally, a high level of radiation was also detected at the site. The incident received widespread media coverage and sparked debates about the existence of extraterrestrial life and the possibility of alien visitation. Some skeptics argued that the incident could have been caused by natural phenomena or a hoax, but the witnesses maintained that they saw a genuine UFO. Despite the years of investigation, it's been no conclusive explanation for the incident has been found, leaving the mystery of the Delphos Ring UFO unsolved. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting out on their porch, but the 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight, pilot, and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange out the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing it. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy, he saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and this is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board either. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet offshore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in the investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. It was also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for, so what could have all those witnesses seen? Since they never officially identified what it was, in the official Government of Canada documents, it is listed as a UFO.